everyone, welcome back to Sew Renew Fashion. This is part 3 on my series for sewing for beginners, and today I'm going to get into some common issues that you might run into and how you can fix them, as well as I'll give you some sewing tips so that your sewing will go smoothly and you can create beautiful garments. Let's get into it. So let's go through some common problems that beginners will have when they're starting to sew, and I had these all the time. So please do not get discouraged if you have these problems. It happens to everyone when they're learning. The first one would be skipped stitches. Now, I don't actually have this, but I'm trying to show it visually. But you see how I have my stitches all close, and then I have some that are wider. Pretend that these are skip stitches. Now this is where you're doing your line of stitching, and then when your needle goes in, it won't be catching. So you'll get some big gaps. You have the thread there, you'll be able to see the thread, but it's not actually going through and creating stitches. This is likely because you have an issue with your needle. Your needle could be bending, it could be old, starting to break. So just make sure you're changing your needles often. It could be that you're also using the incorrect needle size or type of needle. So just test out your stitching with your needle first before you start your project to make sure that the needle you're using will create stitches properly in the fabric, and you don't want to ruin your project. So I recommend always testing on scrap fabric beforehand. So if you're getting skip stitches, just test out your needle, test out different needles, and see if that is possibly the problem, because that is usually what's causing the issue. Also, I always look up what type of needle I should be using before starting a project, just to be safe, just because I'm no expert, and especially if you're a beginner, it just helps a lot. So this is a common issue that happens to people, and you can see there are tons of threads coming out of where the bobbin thread is coming out of, and they're all stuck in the fabric. So first of all, how do you get this unstuck? Don't just pull at it, but what you're going to want to do is open up where your bobbin is stored and pull out your bobbin. See, there's tons of threads down here, but I can usually pull out my bobbin, just cut the bobbin thread, get it out of there, and I'm going to take this apart. And see, this is a bit dirty. I should be cleaning that. Having a dirty bobbin case can also cause issues, but that's not what is causing this issue. Now that I have everything removed, I can just pull all these threads out. I'm going to cut my upper thread. So this is commonly called bird nesting, where all the thread is bunching up at the bottom. It can look slightly different, but this is generally what it is. So I'm going to put my bobbin back in properly. So for my machine, this part goes in first, makes a semicircle across from this, and it should just sit in there. Might fall out, so you might have to hold it. And then this part will go in, and these two arms want to rest on these divots. So I'm going to put that in. Make sure it slides in properly and clicks in. Shouldn't be needing to be forced. I'll just check my bobbin looks fine. Put it back in. Click that in. Now, what is the issue? This is normally caused by either incorrect tension. So see, I have it set at 3. Let's put it back to 5. But honestly, the most common thing is incorrect threading. And it may not be that you incorrectly threaded it to begin with, but I find that this lever here, the thread will pop out of. I find that happens especially when I'm not pulling my threads at the back when I start sewing. If there's not enough tension to pull it down, I find my thread can pop up, get unlooped, and then it will come, instead of going around and up here, it'll just come straight down, and this will cause bird nesting. So if you have this problem, I would first unthread your machine and then completely rethread it to see if that's the issue, and also check your tension. That is usually the cause of it. So I'm just going to unthread my machine, rethread it, going to pull up the bobbin thread again, and now you want to start your stitching, remembering to pull these two threads when you start. Once you do your back stitch, you do not need to pull them, but it's just for your first few stitches that you need to hold on to these so that they're not getting sucked under. A problem you might run into is your garment is not fitting you properly, even though you're using the right size. This could be because you're using the wrong seam allowance, and this is a common problem, and I used to do this a lot when I first started, is not checking the seam allowance. So make sure you're always checking the seam allowance on your pattern, because that will affect the fit of your clothing. Even though it may seem like a small difference, it will have a big impact in your final garment. This one is annoying, but trust me, always pre-wash your fabric. That's because a lot of fabric will shrink once you put it in the wash, so you want to pre-shrink it by washing and drying it before you sew it, so that once you have your final garment, once you put that in the washer and dryer, it's not going to shrink even more, because that will make it so it doesn't fit you properly because you've sewed it originally to your size, but then once it shrinks in the wash, it's not going to be the right size anymore. So this is a very important step that is kind of annoying because you have to go and wash and dry your fabric before starting your projects, but trust me, it is worth it. So here is a tip for sewing around corners. So say I want to go from here and pivot to here. This can also help with sharp curves if you have difficulty sewing curves. So use this for curves or corners. You're going to sew all the way to the corner. Once you get to the corner, you're going to want to hand crank over here so that your needle goes into the fabric, like that. Once your needle is in the fabric, lift your presser foot. So now the only thing holding this in place is your needle, and you can pivot your fabric. It should be very easy to do this until you get it lined up with your next edge. You can put your presser foot down and then continue sewing. You may want to hold the back of this so that it doesn't get sucked under, because sometimes it can get kind of stuck. So now you can see I got a nice sharp corner. Okay, so let's say you make a mistake while you're sewing and you need to seam rip the seam you made. Now I just did a straight stitch on some t-shirt fabric, so it is a bit stretchy, but this should work on any fabric. A quick way to seam rip this is I like to take my seam ripper and carefully get it under there and rip the seam, and do it on two sides. And then what I like to do is go in between where I just rip the seam, wiggle it up a bit, and it'll start coming out. And then I can just pull it out like that. So now I have this whole section already seam ripped. So instead of going bit by bit, just ripping it there, one stitch at a time, you can go a little bit apart. And then it comes out way faster. So that's just a little tip that I like to do instead of picking each individual seam one by one. Here's another tip. So say I want to cut along this line that I've marked here. Do not hold the fabric in the air to try to cut. This will make it very hard to follow the line. See how this is kind of jagged? I'm kind of going on either side. It's not a consistent good line. When you're cutting, keep the fabric on the ground. This will keep it much more stable, so you can be more precise. See, it's not as jagged. Not the best still, but better than this one. So always cut out your fabric on a flat surface. Don't hold it in the air to cut. My last and most important tip is to be patient. Do not rush your projects. I did this a lot when I first started because I was so excited to see my final project. I just wanted to get my clothes done and wear them and see how they looked, but this will cause a lot of issues. You don't want to skip steps and you don't want to rush because you can make mistakes. You want to make sure that you're ironing, pinning, doing all the necessary steps because it will turn out so much better if you be patient, follow all the right steps, take your time, because you really want to make sure that you put your effort into making sure this is something that you will love and you'll wear lots and you want it to hold up. So you want to make sure that the quality you put into it will translate into the quality of clothing that you produce. So just make sure you take your time, pre-wash your fabric, iron it, press it, pin it. Don't skip steps. Don't rush, because then you'll make mistakes and then your garment will be something you're truly very proud of and you'll get way more wears out of it because it's going to be much better. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know if I missed anything that you want me to go into detail on, and let me know what type of videos you want to see next. Bye.